Watch retail prices are getting ridiculous nowadays. Take something like the iconic AP15407 ST, which has almost doubled in retail price. It was launched in 2016 at 61,800 Sing dollars and was last known to retail at $112,300. That isn't even taking into consideration all the Code 1159s that you need to buy to qualify for the watch today. Yet, contrary to what you might expect, this isn't a video to bash AP. The issue of high retail prices is something that plagues almost every single watch brand nowadays. I've met up with quite a few independent brands lately, and hearing the retail prices they're gunning for blows my mind. Today, I'll be discussing the topic and looking at how these sky-high retail prices will impact the market. I'll run through the financials of bundling from some brands like Lange, talk about the depreciation you'll suffer from buying watches, and more. This video is more of a discussion, so if you have any thoughts, do share it in the comments. Let's jump into it. The topic that people are most interested about is the death of the watch bundle. For those unfamiliar, it involves buying a less desirable piece like a Frank Muller, where you take a hit, so you can qualify for something like a Nautilus that goes above retail. The AD side of things is less interesting to discuss in my opinion. Bundling still exists, although the bundles are naturally getting smaller as both customers and ADs themselves see how the premium is narrowing. I've also heard from VIPs that they're getting allocations much more readily without being pushed to buy nonsense. The more interesting topic is bundling at brand-owned boutiques like Lange, Omega, and AP. In the case of Lange, you used to have to purchase a Lange 1 to qualify for a Steel Odysseus. That benchmark gradually shifted upwards, and I last heard that the minimum qualifier today is a Lange 1 time zone. Let's break down the math of a Lange bundle. For pricing, I'm referring to a private database with Lange retail pricing, as the official Lange website has put everything as price upon request. I sure wonder why they would do that. Anyways, the Sing dollar pricing might be slightly off, but only marginally so. Let's suppose you wanted to get a Lange 1 time zone to qualify for a Steel Odysseus today. But out of generosity, I'll assume that instead of waiting 5 years for the Odysseus, you can lock in today's price and get the watch immediately. The time zone retails around 83,000 Sing dollars and moves for 40k and below, so let's assume a 40k loss. An Odysseus retails for 51,000 Sing dollars, and we're seeing brand new current dated pieces moving in the high 60k range. Out of generosity, let's assume a 20k profit. This entire bundle would lose you 20k, and that's already with generous pricing assumptions as well as the impossible scenario where you get the Steel Odysseus today. Lange is a particularly interesting case, where the brand has seen some pretty substantial price increases even as demand for their watches has dropped. The result is that bundles from the brand don't really make financial sense anymore. Is that a bad thing? Maybe for the brand, but not necessarily for collectors. If it means that people can buy limited editions without having to buy an additional watch they didn't want, I actually think that's a great development. From what I've heard, brands like AP are also giving out desirable allocations more readily, so this trend may already be happening. Let's move on to another interesting topic, which is what happens to brand-owned boutiques where nothing goes above retail. For this, I'll compare VC with f.p.journe. VC is an interesting case, since at time of recording, the entire brand catalog trades below retail. Even the regular time-only Blue Overseas has been seen transacting at or below retail when brand new. More importantly, the losses on some of the high-end pieces can be very substantial. If you've watched my previous video on me selling my 4300V, I lost 40k on my watch over 2 years, and would have lost 50k or more if I had held onto it until today. my grail, the Skeleton 4300V, was launched at around $200K, but now retails for $234,000. Yet, it has transacted a few times at about $130K, which is a massive $100,000 loss. I was talking with some other VC collectors about this recently, and essentially, having a watch depreciate is perfectly normal. That's the cost of enjoying a luxury non-necessity good. But for it to drop so substantially becomes an issue, since there's not much reason to buy from the boutique anymore. There's not much a boutique can do to give you experiences or gifts to make up for $100,000 difference. If you really wanted to buy a particular watch, you're better saving that money and buying it gray. In a way, f.p.journe is the complete opposite of VC, where a huge selection of its watches trade at a premium to retail. What's impressive is that this even applies to high-end dress pieces like the Resonance. Show me another non-limited dress watch above $200,000 from Patek, VC, or Lange that trades above retail. You can say what you want about Journe, but it's a brand that treats its customers well from what I've heard, at least when it comes to allocating watches. Comparing the management of VC and FPJ and how both brands have handled the hype is actually a really interesting topic that probably warrants its own video. But the end result is that with how retail and grey watch prices have trended, we may see more VC buyers looking towards pre-owned, while brands like Journe keep chugging along. The biggest question is probably what brands with weaker demand do from here. Perhaps they could severely limit supply in hopes that grey watch prices will adjust upwards, or they can bring back small discounts, although that may hit buyer sentiment. What do you think? Now that we brought up f.p.journe, let's talk about the world of independent watchmaking, which I'm very worried about. I've had the pleasure of meeting a lot of people behind various independent watch brands lately, and hearing about the prices they're charging has me concerned. I'm not going to bring up specific names to put them under fire, but the retail prices for some brands are crazy. I don't think it's a matter of my bank account lacking a few zeros either. I was with some of the biggest collectors I know of independents, and their reaction was exactly the same. In the context of what you can buy today from the grey market or certain indie brands, it's just crazy. There are also some larger indie brands where the entire catalog is readily available at discount to retail on grey. Part of this is the result of demand coming off from peak, but the other half is the rapid rise in retail prices. I remember when I bought my mb&f LM101 in steel in December 2022, when the retail was in the $70K range. A few months later, I believe it jumped to over $90K, which it has remained at since. Hype brands like Roger Smith are an even more extreme example of this that has been well publicized. Sure, costs have gone up, but an almost 30% yearly jump is impressive. I love independence, and my main worry is that it is still ultimately a very niche market. Many brands don't have what I consider a solid financial backing, so I think pricing watches so high is a risky strategy, especially in a world where many people are becoming more sensitive about spending. I've also spoken to many large collectors, and with how prices of brands like Patek have come down, they're looking at moving from indies back to mainstream brands. I do hope independents stay careful on pricing for longevity purposes. Before I end this video, I'll quickly touch on the two kings, Patek and Rolex. These brands stand out in that while some other brands like VC have put a pause on retail price increases, Patek and Rolex continue to bump up retail. The weird part though is that this has definitely impacted demand. I get a lot of questions from people who see precious metal or two-tone sports Rolex pieces available, especially when they're traveling. Yet, a lot of these pieces are already under retail, and the premium of steel sports pieces like the Pepsi or Sprite have seen their premium shrink rapidly. For Pateks, basically all dress watches are below retail, in some cases 40 to 50% off. Again, is this a bad thing? I suppose that for the purist watch collector, no. People will be able to buy watches they want more easily, and there will be less that buy out of speculation. But for the brand, I imagine demand will take a hit. Again, this is all my honest thoughts from the perspective of a collector. I'm unfortunately not the type that can afford to buy watches with zero regard for their market value. Yes, you should buy what you like, and it's perfectly normal for watches to depreciate. But when something is dropping over 100k or more, I think most people would think twice. In fact, I've never met a collector that has no care about prices, and some of these guys have the most impressive watch collections in the world. Ultimately, the numbers speak for themselves, and are something that brands and collectors should think about. If you have any thoughts on this topic, do share them, as I'd love to hear your take. Thank you for watching.